you can have more materials with you, in other words. Yeah. If it is live, it's going to be quite difficult. Um, and if it is recorded, it means that you record it and you play it during our meeting, during our session, and we will watch it, and then we will, we will make some, give some, ask some questions, maybe give some suggestions and things like that. Okay. So let me just think about it, and then I'll try to put it up on Putra Blast. I'm even thinking in terms of whether it is an actual micro teaching or just some sort of a problem solving situation. Yeah, like for example, if I could have a problem like, say, some of your students in class uh, face difficulty in um, number agreement, subject verb number agreement. Yeah. And you want to address this issue, so how would you address it in class? Which means that it doesn't have to be a complete lesson, but maybe just kind of like maybe 10-15 minutes, try to address it in many different possible ways. You can do it explicitly if you think that's the best, or you can do it implicitly, where you kind of like teach about things where where subject verb agreement is being highlighted in some way, but it's not done explicitly. Like, you don't go into the classroom and say, okay, I found that you have problems with subject verb agreement, let me tell you what subject verb agreement is, and so on. Okay, probably not that way. Yeah, so it could be that way, I don't know, but I don't think it's really the best option. Yeah. But you could do it more implicitly. Yeah, so it's not going to be a complete, it may not, yeah, I haven't really decided, but it may not be a complete what do you call this, um, teaching, micro teaching, but rather a problem solving thing that you have to do, or you have to solve uh, in the classroom. Okay. People slowly
Okay.
coming in. Any questions though? Okay,
So
maybe
far,
next
no,
time.
doctor.
Okay, maybe next time what I will do is maybe take attendance earlier, because what's happening is everybody comes in late, and then that's when the attendance is taken before we end the class, so they will have attended. Okay. Uh, I don't know, I'm not too much of a, uh, you know, about attendance, but since the university wants me to take attendance, then I will take attendance lah. Like, my personal feeling is that if you don't come to class, then you probably won't be able to perform well. Okay. And you probably will get a low grade. Okay. That's how maybe some universities, perhaps not in Malaysia lah, but overseas, does it. But at the same time, you are all going to be educators and teachers, so you must have some level of discipline, right? Okay, so this is a good way of making sure that you do have that kind of discipline, so that when you go out, you won't be doing things like making the wrong kind of jokes and things like that, in schools, which is happening right now. So these things are also very important as an educator. You have to be sensitive to these things. Okay. Uh, so no questions. That means I will start sharing my screen, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I just put this up last night. I think late last night. What? Usually, what I do is before the class, I usually look through the presentations that I already have, because I've been teaching this course for several years already, and I look through and I update if it is necessary, and so on and so forth lah. So that's why sometimes I'm a little bit late in uploading it because I need a bit of time to look through it. Okay. So we've looked at Bedstone and we've looked at the approaches that he has talked about. Yeah, the three approaches. Teaching grammar has product, teaching grammar has process, teaching grammar has skill. And as I mentioned earlier, I like that the way he does it because these are three different approaches that I think is quite it gives you three different perspectives lah, of what teaching grammar involves. Okay, so and it's kind of like comprehensive also when you look at all three together. So anyway, we have done that. We have looked very generally before the Bedstone's three approaches to different kinds of you know approaches like processing instruction, task-based, and things like that. Very general, okay. But still, I think you can, if you want, you can kind of like look through them online. You'll find them a lot of people write about it. So now, what we are going to do is just to look at several other issues that normally associated with the teaching of grammar. Yeah, okay, because teaching of grammar is controversial in some ways. Some people say yes, teach it. Some people say no, don't teach it. So it's kind of controversial. Okay, but we all know how important some knowledge of grammar, whether it is through acquisition or through learning, is necessary for our students. Okay. So anyway, this is the general outline for this presentation. First, we'll talk about deductive and inductive approaches in teaching grammar, the advantages of each approach, and also the shortcomings, yeah, of each approach. And then there's another section on different ways of presenting grammar in the classroom. This is in regards to in the lesson itself. Okay, how can you present grammar if you want to present it? What should you be thinking about? How should you do it? What would be the first thing to do? What would be the second, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this will kind of look at things from firstly a more traditional perspective. Some of you I know are quite familiar with PPP, right? And we'll talk about what PPP is. Yeah, presentation, practice, and what, can't remember the other P. I have to look at the slide. Okay, and then there are some other suggestions to consider. Three dimensions and also ensuring interest, because it's very important to when you come to a topic like grammar, right? Sometimes students may not be so motivated, so it's kind of important to ensure students' interest. Okay, so this is sometimes when you, as we look at this, you'll find that there's some similarities to some of the previous presentations, uh, for and against the teaching of grammar, also explicit or implicit, teaching of grammar. It's here also deductive and inductive approaches. Okay. So deductive and inductive approaches to teaching grammar, this is very often discussed. Deductive approach starts with the presentation of a rule and is followed by examples in which the rule is applied. Okay, so this is a very deductive approach. Of course, once again, it's kind of like on a continuum. Okay, you can be very deductive, you can be slightly deductive, and you can be more inductive, or you can be extremely inductive. Okay, so you can imagine, yeah, many of the teachers, sometimes if it's a lecture, it tends to be this way. If you have like 100 students in front of you, okay, or 60, maybe not in the schools, but maybe in institutions, higher institutions, it tends to be more deductive, right? Because you write the rule is what the rule is, and then you provide some examples, okay, in which the rule is applied. And inductive approach starts with some examples from which the rule is inferred. Okay, so inductive inference, right? Okay, so you have you know, we expect the students to be inferring what the rule is. Of course, at the end, maybe the teacher can confirm their inference by telling them what the rule is. Okay, so two ways. This is more reflective of learning. This is more reflective of acquisition. Okay, yeah, because this in learning in the classroom, this is what tends to happen. Outside of the classroom, this is what tends to happen because nobody tells them what the rules are. They make some form of hypothesis. They're referring to the students, and that would be an inductive approach. And the teacher can adopt this approach if it is appropriate. Yeah, and as I mentioned, at the end, yeah, at the end rather than at the beginning, the teacher can provide the rule. Okay, so implicit, this is implicit, this is explicit, right? Okay, you can see that, I hope, yeah. So what are the advantages of a deductive approach? Because you know, you will, as a educator, you will be talking to other people, you know, and they will be asking, oh, I think, you know, people should teach grammar this way or that way or something like that, or they should teach language. If they want to teach language, they should teach grammar first, to give all the rules, etc., first. So when you go out to your wherever you teach, you must have you know a basis and an idea of why they think that way, and so on in terms of your own beliefs, personal beliefs. Okay, so some advantages of a deductive approach. Okay, number one, it gets straight to the point, right? Because it says this is the way to do subject verb agreement, right? Okay, so straight to the point, time saving, right? And number two, it respects the intelligence and maturity of students, especially adults. Okay, it respects this in the sense that we feel that they will be able to understand. Okay, uh, so it's okay maybe with students who are very academically inclined, right? They're very academically inclined, or they are adults, or they are, you know, top scorers, you know, not so academically inclined, but maybe, I mean, academically inclined in the sense that they want to get good grades. So they always want to know what's right and what's wrong. So they always want to, you know, think of what are the rules. You know, tell me the rules. No need to go around this, beat around the bush. I just want to know the rules, and I can memorize them. And when it comes out in the exams, I will get the right answers. Okay. So to some extent, this is, you know, it respects the intelligence and maturity of students. Yeah. This also, you know, is a reflection of arguments for and against the teaching of grammar, right? Meet expectations about learning, yeah, and allows teachers to deal with grammar points directly. So there's some, you know, some overlap or some, you know, it reflects what we have looked at in that earlier presentation. So these are some of the advantages of the deductive approach. Okay. Some of the disadvantages of the deductive approach. Okay, it's a turn off as students may be expected to have considerable meta language. Okay, meta language means, what does meta language mean? Meta language. Anybody? Myra?
Hold on.
Yeah,
I
looking
typed
up.
the wrong.
Looking up. I mean, the box is around you, around your name. So that's why I called you.
I have searched Google
Yes, Nurul.
and I found that meta language is a language used to describe another language.
Okay. Meta language is like language that's used to describe language. Okay. Metaphysics is physics that is used to describe physics. Okay. Something like that. Yeah. Um, So meta means it goes back to what it is joined with, meta language. Okay, so what this means is they need to have considerable meta language, means they have to know what verbs are, what nouns are, etc., etc., etc. That's why it's considered a turn off now, because some people don't like that. Okay. Okay, so second bullet, teacher fronted, transmission style, teacher explanation versus student interaction. So this is, of course, again, um, mm, reflective of the idea that language is communication. So you should be communicating rather than listening to the person in front just talking to you all the time. Okay, so this is the disadvantage because it does not allow a lot of practice for the students. Okay. Number three, explanation is less engaging than other forms of presentation, for example, demonstrations, even simulations and problem solving and things like that. Yeah. So if it is deductive, is the teacher in front and he's trying to explain or she's trying to explain. So it's not so engaging. I mean, unless you are once again very, very inclined towards that kind of thing. Okay. And number four, it encourages viewing language as declarative. Okay, why is this a disadvantage? Can anybody kind of like help explain this? You can't find
May
it
I try?
online or in the dictionary.
Then may I try?
Yes, go ahead.
Because I remember once declarative is like explaining to them directly what the rules are, right? So
Right.
if it's like encouraging viewing language as declarative, it's just viewing language as bunch of rules, like you need to do this, you need to do that. It's not
Yes.
like encouraging the students to like explore more into the
Right.
language.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
Is that how one way
Yes.
to see it?
Yes. I think that's perfect. Okay. That's it. It's either declarative or procedural, right? Procedural means you can use it. So if the teacher does this approach all the time, so the students will think of language as only being declarative, meaning to say he will only look at what the rules are. He will not be trying to actually use the language because the deductive approach does not encourage this. Okay, doesn't provide that much encouragement for procedural use. Yeah, I mean using the language. Okay, so this is a disadvantage in a sense because we don't want our students to end up being walking around knowing all the rules but cannot use them. Yeah. Okay, so that's a big issue lah. Yeah, and they just think of the rules and they don't really know how to use them and when to use language, how to use language, when to use language, when it's appropriate to use things in different situations, etc. Communicative competence, right? Okay. The other side of the coin is the inductive approach. Okay. And as I mentioned, I think uh, many of these things are, similar to what we looked at. Okay. Just maybe from a slightly different perspective. Self-discovery leads to better integration. Okay. So if you learn on your own, if you understand it on your own, it fits better into your developing language system. Okay, so it goes, you can link it, integrate it much better. Yeah. Another advantage, students are more actively engaged. Yeah, and I think you can imagine this. Yeah, you can agree to this very easily. If it is an inductive approach, it's no longer teacher fronted. Okay, it's more students engaging in the language. Okay, in various ways. Yeah, you can think of many different ways. Favor students who like pattern recognition and problem solving. Okay, so very early on, we were talking about is grammar just about learning rules, and it's not necessarily so. Yeah. It's also about recognizing certain kinds of patterns. Yeah? that the students can form on their own, patterns. Okay, and this is now seen as one way of learning. You recognize certain patterns that are occurring. Okay, and problem solving. Yeah, problem solving in the sense that you're given a task, you're given something like many of the teaching grammar has process activities. Okay, they are problem solving. Yeah, you have to know, oh, okay, how do I solve this? How do I use language to convey what I think is the solution? Okay, so it's problem solving. Yeah, allows for added language practice through problem solving group work. Yeah, so in the inductive approach, you don't really control for the kind of you kind of regulate or control, right? Hopefully that the students will be using some of the things that you have taught, but you can't really control uh, because ultimately maybe the students will be using other kinds of language, yeah, and they will be practicing other forms of language that you may not have taught. And we understand that language is creative construction. Okay, so we can't rely on just the things that we have taught and try to expect that the students will use only what we have taught. You can't go around and say, no, I didn't teach you this language. You can't be using it. Okay, because they will be using it regardless, because they are thinking of how to express themselves. So they may have come across certain other words or certain other patterns or certain other structures elsewhere. And when you have group work or this kind of activity, they have the opportunity to use them in order to solve the task that were given. And then number 5 is prepares students for autonomy. Uh, this is a very big thing, yeah, that is actually a requirement or a prerequisite to the success of many of the um, reforms, educational reforms that is happening. Okay, like for example, classroom-based assessment. Okay, and many other things actually requires students to be autonomous. Okay, meaning to say the students they take their own responsibility for learning. Okay, they identify what their weaknesses are, they identify what their strengths are, etc., etc. So this is autonomous and self-directed students. And many of the things that we want to implement, whether at the school level or at the at the university level, requires students to be autonomous. Okay, this does not mean that the teacher just says, "Okay, I'm done. You do things on your own." Um, that kind of approach. But really, it means that the teachers should convey the message that they are willing to assist when the students feel it is necessary. Okay, and students should also understand that they should be meeting up with their teachers or instructors if they need to. Yeah, at any time, and this is what is actually required. Okay, for many of the things that we want to do. Yeah, so unfortunately, the old-fashioned way is to almost rely completely on the teacher. What the teacher says or what the instructor says is what I will remember, and is what I will kind of like, they say what the word is regurgitate, right, during the exams. Okay, but really, if that happens, then we are in trouble because really what we want is for the students to actually be better than the teachers later on. Yeah. So how can that happen if the students only think of what the teacher says is the only thing that I will want to learn? Okay. That way it's limited lah. If the teacher or the instructor has X number of or amount of knowledge, then the student will have X minus 1 or maybe x also, but it will never be above x, will never be x plus 1. Okay, so this is, you know, something that we need to always consider. Autonomy should always encourage this. Okay, disadvantages of an inductive approach. Okay, time and energy needed. This is really, really, really true. Okay, so if you want to try to go for an inductive approach, you know, you really have to spend more time, more energy, okay, in order to get the students to be, you know, discovering things on their own in some ways, okay, because you need to provide them with the triggers and the sparks so that they will be able to realize how things work. Okay, it's very challenging. Okay, uh, time that you take on and trying to understand a rule through discovery, okay, through an inductive approach, will take away from time that you can use on productive activity. Okay, this is also something that you need to that we need to bear in mind. Okay, the more time that is needed if things are slow because you're not telling them directly what the rule is, and you're expecting them to understand what it is, there is the possibility that you won't have as much time on, you know, productive activity, meaning to say they cannot use the language that much. Okay, to practice, yeah, to confirm how the language is used. Yeah, so because we are given very limited time in the schools and also in proficiency classes at the university. Okay, and also sometimes the students may hypothesize the wrong rule. Okay, so this is also related to time. Maybe they have to hypothesize, they hypothesize the wrong rule, so you have to go back and then try to, you know, explain it or give it a different, you know, more exposure, then only they will realize that realize the correct rule or pattern. Yeah, there's a lot of demand on teachers in planning a lesson. Okay, time and energy needed. Okay, so really, teachers, architects. Okay, hold on. Okay, sorry. Okay, I hope you don't mind. I know that if it is in a real class, you know, usually I will not answer, especially if it is really, I mean, if it's not so important, I'll just tell them that, you know, can call back later. Okay, but I need to also have breaks, yeah, because sometimes it gets very tiring to talk about the presentation. So anyway, we're looking at this, yeah, disadvantages or spelling mistake. Yeah, disadvantages of an inductive approach. So we talked about this, we talked about all these three, okay, and the demands, right? The demands. So as I said, the teacher is an architect now, okay, not just kind of like going in and saying, oh, okay, I'm just going to kind of like, teach this rule, but when you think in terms of what kind of activity you want to use, you're thinking of how it is going to be related to what you want them to learn, and so on, how much language it will produce, okay, and so on and so forth. So a lot of demands on the teacher in planning a lesson, okay, and it can frustrate some students who prefer to be simply told the rules. Yeah, this is also true. Okay, some, as I said many times, there will be students that will just say, oh, just tell us what's right and what's wrong. Okay, so this is an issue where I think teachers need to find the right balance lah. Okay, the right balance, and this right balance will depend on the kind of students that you get. Okay, so my belief is that teachers should not go into every class and try to be deductive every time. Okay, they can be deductive sometimes, but they need to be inductive at other times. Okay, some things that maybe students may be able to infer what the rule is or the pattern is, maybe the teacher should be trying to do it that way. Yeah, some that may be a bit difficult or something like that, maybe you can do it deductively. Okay, so we need to find strike the right balance. Yeah, okay, yeah, but we need to know the existence of both approaches, both ways. Yeah, and the benefits and the shortcomings of each way. Yeah. Okay, so we move on to another sub topic, which is ways of presenting grammar in class. Yeah, and in grammar, in teaching grammar, uh, in teaching listening, for example, or maybe even other skills, you have a pre-listening, you have while listening, and then you have post-listening. Okay, I don't know whether you have come across this. Okay, when you want to teach listening or even reading or even speaking, yeah, you have pre reading, while reading, and post reading. Okay, so pre reading is like you start talking about the topic of the text that the students are going to read, right? You don't just come into class and say, okay, read. Yeah, you come into class and then you start a small discussion, and say, let's say maybe uh, the text that they're going to read is about viruses. Okay, so you come in and then you start talking about, oh, okay, or do you know any, you know um, have you heard of a virus, what a virus means, things like that. And then you ask personal things like, have anyone here ever had a virus, do you know of any viruses, and then you can ask them to tell a little bit of a story if they've had an experience of a virus. And then only you start giving them the context, the reading, okay, where they will read about viruses. And then you have a post reading activity where based on the reading they will try to maybe answer some questions and maybe discuss certain things. Okay, so that's a pre, while, and post format. So in grammar, um, you can't really have a pre, while, and post, right? For grammar, how are you going to do that? Let's say subject verb agreement. How are you going to do that? Pre, while, and post. It's a bit difficult. So you have to have slightly different ways of presenting grammar in class. Okay, and this is the some of the examples given, some of the formats given, and you can decide which one is the most appropriate, because there is no one right answer. Okay, it's going to once again depend on context. Okay, let me just silence my phone so that you won't get uh, interrupted again. Okay, so PPP model: presentation, practice, production. Okay, very traditional. got logical appeal. Okay. Presentation is the grammar explanation. You come into the classroom and then you start explaining about the grammar. This is a very deductive approach. Okay. Practice. Yeah. You get the students to do some sort of practice. In preparation for their production, in preparation for their producing the language. Okay. So maybe you present and then you give them an exercise, okay, simple exercise using the grammar structure, and then after that you ask them to maybe do a little role play or skit or something like that, okay, where they produce using the structures that you have presented. Okay. So this is a very common, yeah, very safe, very common way of talking about grammar. It's kind of traditional, no real problems with it. But let's say if you are more interested in an inductive approach, it's not really there, right? It's all very teacher holds the student's hands, right? So okay, maybe for some students who are maybe at beginning or lower intermediate level, okay. But for those who are much better, maybe this may not be the best way. Or for those who are a little bit more, you know, motivated, maybe you can do other things as well. Okay. So you look at this PPP, it's got logical appeal, right? Okay, it seems to make sense. This is the way you want to teach, right? Present, get them to practice, and then get them to produce. It's logical. Okay, but the assumption is language is learned in bits and is linear. Okay, meaning to say you have to break down the language into little bits. Like for example, I'm going to talk about subject verb agreement. Okay, and then it's linear because this is how we're going to do it. Every time you come in and talk about grammar, it's going to be 1, 2, and 3: presentation, practice, production, presentation, practice, production, presentation, practice, and production. Maybe after a while the students will get a little bit tired lah. Okay, if you do it all the same way all the time. Okay, and the assumption is that accuracy always precedes fluency. Before you want to achieve fluency, you have to achieve accuracy. Okay, so I don't know how you feel about this, because I'm sure there are some students who are so maybe hyper or so motivated. They will try to just use the language, although they know that there is some problems with their accuracy, but they will try. Okay, which is fine. Okay, and if you say accuracy always precedes fluency, it's going to give the message to the students that don't talk before you know you are always right. Okay, you are right in how to construct the what's this the sentence. Okay, don't talk or don't do anything. You make sure you're correct, you're accurate first, then only you try to use the language, which is not always the right thing to do. Yeah. Okay, so that's one format. Another format which is similar, okay, this is Penny in 1988. This is the PPP model, yeah, okay, PPP model. This is Penny she has changed it slightly. Presentation, okay, so you do presentation. Presentation could involve maybe a reading text, or something like that, which has the grammar point involved, concerned, and then you isolate and explain. Okay, so it's slightly different here. It's presentation beginning, but it's a different kind of presentation because this is grammar explanation, whereas here presentation is you present a context maybe, or you present a text, yeah, where the grammar point is being used. Okay, and then you isolate, okay, that grammar point, and you explain. So the isolation and explanation here is actually the presentation here. Okay, the presentation here is maybe a contextualization of it. Okay, so presentation, isolation and explanation, then practice, okay, then test to see whether assess lah, test or assess to see whether they know they are okay with it. Yeah, they are able to. So the writing part or the testing part comes here, whereas here it is the practice where maybe you can do a little bit of testing, okay, but here it's slightly different. Okay, here it's practice. Uh, Practice here is to try to use the language. Uh, well, no, I guess practice here is similar to practice here. Okay, but here some way of testing whether the testing is through the students producing the language or something like that, producing whether it is spoken or producing in written form. Okay, so is this so far clear to everyone?
Clear.
Okay.
Doctor,
Yes,
so this one we present, I mean, we give the students the example first and then we explain, the explanation comes later.
right, right.
Okay.
This is, presentation is like kind of like, uh, it's not really give an example. Yeah, maybe you can say give an example. You can have, like I mentioned, a text. Yeah, give them a reading text, short paragraph maybe, and in that short paragraph there are examples of whatever you want to focus on, past tense. And then after that you can say, oh students, did you notice that this word had an ed at the end? Okay, so you're isolating, and then you explain it a little bit. Ed here means that it is in the past tense. Okay, and then you do a little bit of practice. Now I want you to do some practice on using ed forms. Okay, and then it's practice. They will practice first, and then you can test by getting them to produce it in some way. Okay, whether it is written or they do a little bit of a simulation maybe, depending lah. I think the test is for really the teacher making the decision that the students know, uh, they already understand lah. Yeah. Okay, so this is a slightly different format, although there are similarities. Okay, this is suggested by Chelsea Murcia and Hills, 1988 also. All these are old, kind of old. Okay, presentation of the grammar structure, focus practice for manipulating the structure. Okay, communicative practice where the structure is used in communicative activities, teacher feedback, and correction. So a lot of similarity to Penny okay. Uh, Presentation of the grammar structure depends on how you want to interpret this. It could mean in some form of a context. It could mean also in more deductive manner. Okay, where you tell what the rule is. Okay, focus practice. Yeah, for manipulating the structure. Yeah, and then you have communicative practice where the structure is used in communicative activities. So here, Chelsea Murcia and Hills has, intentionally lah, yeah, very clearly, um, intentionally included practice which is communicative. Yeah. So focus practice and communicative practice, I think we can make the distinction. Can anybody try to make the distinction between what they think focus practice and communicative practice means? Yeah, if I were not fasting, this is the time when I can drink, while waiting for your response. Okay. So what do you think? What's the difference between focus practice and communicative practice? Is it the same? I'm sure it's not the same, right?
I think for focus practice is maybe just using the structure, but for communicative practice, it is used in communication, in spoken. Is it?
Okay. Right. So for focus practice, you can have isolated sentences and things like that. Yeah. You know, sentence number 1 is not related to sentence number 2, not related to sentence number 3. They're all kind of like focusing on the grammar point. Okay. Communicative practice is where you have discourse, yeah, where you try to get them to maybe look at a dialogue and try to fill it in based on the grammar point, or you can have short exchanges between two students, right? Where you use the same grammar point. Okay, so it's communicative practice, yeah. And then the teacher feedback and correction. So here, teacher plays a more more explicit role in some ways, yeah. But it's important also feedback, yeah, where the teacher provides feedback, yeah, and focuses on, maybe some problems that he or she notices when the students do this kinds of practice, okay. And correction, yeah. And feedback can be also positive feedback, just saying, okay, everything is good, you all are doing it well, correctly, etc., etc. Okay, so teacher feedback and correction. Yeah, so this is a different way of presenting grammar. So we already have 3 ways. These are more, as I said, traditional ways, and they're safe ways, very safe ways, very straightforward ways. This is another format of presentation. This is task based. Okay, task based. Yeah, and this is from Thornbury. Okay, these are 2 books by Scott Thornbury. They're kind of useful also. Not as expensive as Bedstone's book. So if you find them, you want to buy them, go ahead. Teach Grammar, How to Teach Grammar by Scott Thornbury. And this is resource book for teachers, grammar, also by Scott Thornbury. Okay, so they're useful books. You can always use them. I mentioned in the previous class last semester, you should get you know a, a reference grammar book, right? So reference grammar is important, so that you can, if you have any problems with the grammar, you can always go back to the reference grammar book and find out what the answer is. Okay, I'll understand the grammar point better. But at the same time, books like this, which deal with teaching how to teach grammar and so on, also could be useful for you as a teacher, yeah, later on. Okay, so task, teach, and task. TTT, not PPP, but TTT. Okay, task, teach, and task. The first task, perform a communicative task. Okay, give them some sort of a communicative task. Like for example, you want to buy a bus ticket to go back home to your kampong, and you want to talk to the bus ticket seller and ask for that. Yeah, so this is a communicative task. Okay, teach is teach language that could be used. Okay, meaning to say when you give the task, uh, I mean, they perform the task, they perform it as best as they can, at least this model is suggesting. And then you observe, okay, you observe how they did it, and you teach certain language that they could do, they could use to perform the task better, okay? And then you re-perform the task, do the task again, or a similar task lah. So first, performing a communicative task. The first task can be one example from one group. Okay, demonstration lah. Maybe in your class, you have 3 or 4 very good students. Okay, and then you give them a task and say, okay, today what we're going to do is we're going to listen to how Imanina, Anis, and Ikwan is going to mm, buy a bus ticket. Okay, one person is going to be the ticket seller, the other person, etc., etc. lah. Okay, and then they come to the front of the class and they do their little simulation. Okay, and then they go back to their seats, and you as the teacher, you focus on the language that they use and the language that could be used. And then the next step is, okay, now I want everybody to, I'm going to give everybody a little task and I want you to, perform the task, right? So they already have a demonstration, they already have been given, some language that they could use, and then now they are doing it on their own, okay? So maybe the ones who are not as good as the first three. Okay, so this is a very simple format, yeah, presentation in the classroom. So when you teach, you can teach also the grammar structures and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is more task based, yeah. So perform a communicative task, teach language that could be used, and then re-perform the task. Okay, so that's another format, and this is also another format. This is getting to be a little bit more inductive, okay, and getting to be a little bit more not so straightforward, okay. It's tends to be a little bit more student-centered, yeah, if at all it's possible, yeah. But this is more student-centered. It's a 3E model, Sai Soyev, 1999. The first E is exploration, okay. So students given examples and asked to find patterns. Okay, they're not told what the patterns are. Okay, they are asked to find patterns. You give them a text, for example, okay, and or you give them maybe isolated sentences also, okay, and then ask them, okay, what's the similarity between sentence 1 and sentence 2 or something like that, yeah, and so on, and they will hopefully be able to find patterns, okay. And after they have found the patterns, exploration stage, there is an explanation stage. Okay. So if you compare this to, let's say, one of these, yeah, presentation, isolation and explanation, or this one, presentation, practice, production, you'll find that here, there's no real presentation, right? There's no, the teacher just takes a back seat, kind of like, uh, watches from the sidelines or something like that. Yeah. And the students are, kind of like self-discovery lah, hopefully. Yeah. Maybe the teacher, I won't say, maybe it's wrong to say takes a back seat, but the teacher can go around asking the right kind of questions, do you notice this? Do you notice that? Etc. Etc. But the teacher doesn't explicitly tell them what the patterns are, kind of like just facilitating or guiding. Okay, and you can see that this is going to take a lot more time, right? Yeah, this is going to take a lot more time. Okay, and the next stage is explanation. Okay, with the patterns found, students and teachers summarize what has been discovered. Okay, so here it's not teachers tell the students what the patterns are, but students and teachers summarize what has been discovered. Okay, together. Yeah. Once again, may not work all the time and may not work so well in our current, education climate. Okay, because currently in Malaysia we're not very much self-discovery and self-directed yet, our students. So, but you can try it out, see whether it works. If it doesn't, then you can always do some other things. Okay. So, but as far as possible, if you can engage the students to collaborate or come together with the teacher, with you as the teacher, uh, to come to the conclusion, then it's much better. Okay, it's much better. Okay, and finally, expression. Okay, students start practicing the production of meaningful utterances in meaningful and communicative tasks. Yeah, one thing is it's called expression, not practice anymore, but expression. Okay, so and it's seen in this description also. Uh, they start practicing the production of meaningful utterances. Okay, meaningful. That means it's meaningful to them lah. It's something that they care about. Okay, in meaningful and communicative tasks. Okay, meaningful and communicative tasks. It's something that they really want to convey. Okay, so once again, the teacher will have the responsibility of trying to explain what is, trying to create tasks that are communicative and meaningful. Okay. And the PACE model. Okay. The PACE model is by Donato and Hout, 1992. I'm sure there are other models as well, but more recent models. But I think you get the picture, how things are kind of like changing. But it doesn't mean that the more traditional ones you cannot use anymore. But now you have more options. Okay, you have more options, more approaches, more ways how you can kind of introduce, grammar. Okay, and sometimes people talk about not a whole lesson being a grammar lesson, but mini lessons. Yeah, in whatever you're trying to teach, you can have a little mini lesson. Okay, and the whole process of all this, each stage may not be very long. Okay, it depends. Yeah, it depends on the situation. Okay, so pace. P is presentation. What kind of a presentation? It's presentation of meaningful language, presentation of language as a whole. So if you present, once again, you present reading passage. Yeah, that's P, presentation of meaningful language and language as a whole. Okay. Of course, in the back of your mind, you already know why you're using that passage that you have chosen. Okay, because maybe it's got the grammar points that you are interested in getting the students to learn. Okay, so presentation of meaningful language. Okay, presentation of language as a whole. A is attention, similar to isolation. Yeah, attention, but they call it attention here. Focus the students' attention to selected items in the presentation part. Okay, so it's the same as isolation, but it's from a different perspective. Okay, because who does the isolation? The teacher. Who pays attention is the students. Yeah? Focus the teacher. What does the teacher do? The teacher focuses the students' attention. Okay, to selected items in the presentation part. Yeah. So PAC, co-construct. Okay, co-construct an explanation. Once again, like the 3E model, okay, this is co-constructing an explanation. The students and the teachers work together. Okay, once again, may work, may not work, depends on the students, depends on the context, but this is a technique or an approach that's available and that's being suggested. Of course, it's got justification in terms of when you co-construct, you're developing self-autonomous learners, you're putting the responsibility back to the students and all these other things that are in some way useful for the student as they go on their own journeys. Okay, so co-construct an explanation. Students and teachers work together. Teacher can use questions to guide students. Okay, so now teachers will have to have the skills to use the right kind of questions. Okay, in addition to forming questions that are grammatical, yeah, because especially in a language class. Okay, so very often I find that many students, when they form questions, they form it uh, wrongly, not grammatical. And we discussed this, I think, in the first class, when it comes to questions, how to construct the right kind of questions. So you have to make sure that your questions, when you ask them, are grammatical. Okay, you cannot say things like, why you go here, why you go there. why this wrong? You know, you have to say it all correctly. Okay, why is this wrong? Why did you go there? You know, that kind of thing. Don't drop the do or the auxiliaries. Okay. So anyway, the teacher can use questions to guide the students. Yeah, which means that the teacher has to be able to be, I mean, has to be on her feet or on his feet all the time, on his toes. Okay, and thinking of what is the right questions, what are the right questions to ask. Maybe different groups will be asked different questions if they're working in groups. If they're working in a class, you know, same thing. You have to figure out what kind of questions to help them. Okay, in trying to co-construct an explanation. Okay, and number three, extension activity. Okay, extension allows students to use knowledge in a creative way. Yeah, not worksheets. Okay, so this is not practice. This is extension. Okay, now that you know how this grammar structure works, how are you going to use it? You know, come up with an activity where you actually use it. And this coming up with the activity is not on the part of the teacher. Yeah? It's the students who come up with an activity where the target grammar point is being used in a creative way. Okay, because so when you look at this, it's not grammar as rules all the time, trying to memorize what the grammar rules are, but it's a lot of engagement and a lot of understanding. And in this particular model, even the production or use of language, okay, is given to the students how they want to do it, using the grammar point, but a creative, you know, use the knowledge in a creative way. Okay, so now it's not like the teacher telling them, okay, let's do a simulation of how you're going to buy a bus ticket to go back home to your kampong, but it's just going to be like, okay, now you have the structure. Can I come up with something, some sort of a play, some sort of a simulation on your own, where can I is being used. Okay, so they have to think, you know, they have to think, not the teacher so much anymore. Maybe the teacher can just provide some guidance like questions, you know, but they have to think in terms of how to use can I in certain kinds of situations. Okay, so slightly different, yeah, from all the rest. And you can see from the very beginning right up till the end, I mean the first few slides in this subsection to this slide right now, it has changed from more teacher focused or teacher centered to more student centered. Okay, so and the demands on the kind of activities have also changed, because the earlier ones, the activities you can imagine very simple. Just give them a few drills, just give them a few exercises, and then ask them a few questions, you know. But now the students themselves will have to try to show how they can use that language or that grammar point that they have just learned in certain kinds of situations. So they have to think about this. Yeah. So oh, a lot more. 26. We're only at 15. Okay. Any questions here so far? No questions. Yes,
No
Nurdina.
question from me.
No question, doctor.
No questions. What do you think? What do you think of all the different formats of presentation? Which ones do you like? Which ones do you think is a bit difficult? Which ones do you think would be simple?
I think I really like the inductive one because, like, I don't know, it makes students to engage more,
Yeah.
to actually use the grammar, like they know through they know within their own,
Mm.
because like
Yeah.
but I think the hard one um,
Yeah. They're the harder ones also, right? The more difficult
yeah
ones
the
to do, right?
yeah
Yeah. Okay. So maybe it's like if you're tired on the day when you're supposed to teach, you go to class, and then you can do the easier ones. You can do the PPP. But if
Bring
you
them to
want
library.
Iki what?
go to the library,
That's what my teacher did.
go to the library, yeah. When they're tired, yeah. When they
Yeah, they'll be like, go, do nilam.
do nila. Okay. Yeah, okay. But you can do the PPP or something like that. Very, very straightforward, very simple. Okay. But at other days, you should try other ways, okay, and see how they respond lah. Okay. Sometimes it's not going to work. Sometimes it could be a huge success, but at other times maybe it's not going to work. Okay. Depends on your students. Right. Okay, any other comments, any other suggestions or thoughts?
So doctor, if it doesn't work, then we just have to teach them traditionally lah. Like that.
Um, if you're teaching in a lesson, in a particular lesson, and you're trying to do, say, the PACE model, okay, and it doesn't work, you need to have a contingency plan, meaning to say, if it doesn't work, how are you going to switch? What are you going to do? Like, for example, maybe the PACE model is co-construct and explanation. Maybe it doesn't work. The students are all very quiet. They're not interested. They just want to know what the right answers are. So, okay, never mind. This time around, you do that. Okay, you have tried. Yeah, it does not seem to work that well. Maybe it does work with some, or one or two students. Maybe the others just turn off. Okay, so you have to, the next time you come into class, you have to decide whether you want to use the same format, knowing what the benefits are, okay, but adapting certain things so that you will come up with your in the end, the bottom line is how to get the students to realize and learn, you know and you can, as a teacher, you can kind of like always, all these are just guidelines. You don't really have to follow them exactly the way they are suggested. You can move things around if you want. Even PPP, where the production of the language is supposed to be number 3, you can move it around. You can do it number 2, you can do it number 1, okay, and play around with it. Okay. So it's up to you lah, how you want to do it. Okay, but whatever the case, in any kind of a lesson, if there is a breakdown in the lesson where it doesn't seem to succeed, you have to have some sort of a contingency plan. Okay, and that contingency plan is not, okay, it's not, okay, it doesn't seem like you're interested, let's all go to the library. Okay, that's not the contingency plan lah. Okay, the contingency plan is you have to do something else to you can suddenly say, okay, let's do a simulation, or let's do a little quiz, or let's do some sort of a game. That's fine, but don't do it all the time now. It's only when it doesn't seem to work. Okay,
Okay.
so we move on, just for a little bit longer.
Doctor, before that, I have a question.
Yes.
I don't really get the attention one. What does it mean to focus the students' attention of selected items? Does that mean we are asking them if they get what we want to convey?
Okay, let's say we are interested in subject verb agreement lah. It's not a very good example, but that we'll use that as an example. So presentation of meaningful language, this is the whole text lah, right? And then attention is we try to focus their attention to subject verb agreement. Okay, that is found in the passage that we have chosen. That's what attention means. We try to focus their attention to it by asking questions like, look at the verb that appears, or look at the word that appears after the subject. And all of them have got singular subjects, and all of them have got s lah. Don't mention that to them, but and ask them things like, what do you see about you know, what do you see that's similar about all the words that appear after the subject? Okay, so that's focusing your attention on that aspect of the presentation part. Okay, it's like isolation where you take out subject and verb and say, okay, the subject singular, the verb is an S. Okay, but here you're trying to ask them questions, set them up for them to kind of realize that, you know, that after the subject, the word that comes after the subject, if the subject is one singular, then the word that comes after the subject in present tense has an S. Okay, that's what attention here refers to. Okay, is that okay, Najwa?
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, welcome. Any other questions? Any other comments or opinions? Next week is already break, right?
Yes,
Doctor,
Raya.
Yeah,
Doctor,
Raya.
for the task-based approach, does it mean like everything is like boring, like the worksheets, or task-based is like, you know, role play is counted as task-based as
Yes,
well?
yes. A role play is a task. A task is getting them to do something. Yeah? A task, getting them to complete something. Problem solving is a task. Okay, so a
So
task is an activity. Yeah,
task can be deductive or inductive.
Yeah, but it tends to be more inductive lah. It tends to be more inductive. Like for example, a communicative task, yeah, is a setting, yeah, a setting like buying a bus ticket and that kind of thing. That's a role play lah. It's a simulation, a role play. Okay, it's not filling in drills. It's not that kind of a task. Okay, it has to be a little bit more than that because here it says perform a communicative task, right? Perform a communicative task, and it's focusing on the word perform. Okay, so the underlying kind of understanding to task based is that task based teaching and learning, yeah, in language is that you're helping the students to use the language, the kind of uh, use of language that they will encounter when they go out of the classroom. So that's why we say it's a task, that kind of a task. Okay. If we think that when they go out, when they already want to work, they're outside the classroom already, they will have to use the language to sell things, then the task will be about something similar lah, something trying to sell something or something like that. Okay, if you're teaching ESP, English for Specific Purposes, and your students are all, salesmen, for example, then the tasks that you have are all related to selling things. Okay, so that's what is meant by a task. It doesn't mean task is doing filling in the blank activity with isolated sentences. That's not really what they are referring to when they mention task.
Oh, okay, all right, got it, Doctor.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Oh, okay. This is another. Sorry, this is kind of like a continuation of the PACE model. Yeah? The PACE model is related to the whole language movement. Yeah? Where whole language refers to wanting to always keep language intact, not breaking up into small bits, into grammar points, etc., etc. So it's very, very inductive. It's very, very discovery learning kind of thing. It's very, very implicit. Okay, because whole language movement feels that for you to pick up the language, you have to be presented with the language as a whole, not in small parts. Okay, so this pace is a reflection of the whole language thing also. Okay, so the teacher foreshadows the grammar explanation through the use of integrated discourse. This is P. Okay, P. Yeah. So for example, a story, a passage, this is all integrated discourse, right? Okay. Number two, the teacher uses multiple passes and recycles the story, which deepens comprehension. Okay. So this is attention, because the assumption here is, and attention can be done in many different ways, but here the assumption is that if you use multiple passes, meaning to say you use it many times, okay, maybe slightly different, uh, each time you use it, and recycles the story, okay, it deepens comprehension, and also the attention is greater to the grammar point that you are interested in teaching, because you are kind of like recycling it, and then in the end the assumption lah is that the students begin to realize how this is being expressed by using certain parts of speech, or certain grammar points like past tense or etc. Okay, so once meaning is clear, teacher turns attention to form. Both teacher and students co-constructs grammar explanation. Okay, so co-construct an explanation. This is moving from A to C. So here it's already like in between A to C, and the co-constructing the explanation is there lah. Yeah, and then extension activities to allow meaningful use. Okay, so for this model, what it's trying to say is that what's important at the end is not to just do worksheets to kind of like consolidate, okay, the the structure, but really putting the language into use, okay, really using that structure into meaningful use. Okay, so that's why the students create something which is, the students develop something which is creative, in a creative way, use it in a creative way. Okay, so so right now, the format of presentation in classroom, really no clear format. If you look at Bedstones, for example, if you go back to Bedstone, there is no clear format, but concepts. Instead there are concepts to consider. Okay, so this is also one thing that you may want to consider as well. That ensure that there is some form of noticing that is happening. Some of these talk about noticing. This is noticing, right? This is noticing. Okay, this is also structuring, right? Okay, so when you look back at all the others, okay, there are also aspects, glimpses of noticing, structuring, all occurring. Okay, but here for Bedstone, there's no real format of presentation. It's how you want to do it, depending on your situation, depending on the students. But there are important concepts to consider. Yeah, noticing, how do you get the students to notice? Structuring, how do you get them to kind of like figure out what is happening? Okay, authentic interaction practice. Many of the models also talk about practice which are authentic, genuine, a reflection of what happens outside of the classroom. Okay, with communication related elements, regulated. Yeah, it's found in the meaning to say, you control for time, you control for topic, you regulate time, topic, etc. And also reflection, noticing in use can also be done. Okay, like feedback, when we talk about feedback, uh, you know, teacher feedback and correction, you can modify it slightly, or to include reflection and noticing in use, all these strategies related to teaching grammar as skill. So this is how Bedstone may approach it, because he doesn't talk about a very fixed way of presenting grammar, okay, but he rather talks about concepts that should be included in the grammar lesson, where depends, maybe it'll fall into place nicely and it'll come into some sort of a format, but what the format is not so important. What's important is the concepts. Okay, are you doing these things? Are you helping them to notice, helping them to structure? Are you providing them with interaction opportunities? Are you getting them to reflect, these kinds of things? Okay. Okay. See, so these are some possible contexts, prompts, not really methods lah, but context and prompts that you can use for grammar, yeah, presentation in the language classroom. Okay, of course you can integrate it with other language skills. So you may be teaching writing, or you may be teaching reading, okay, and then you find that there is an opportunity, or students ask a question, what does this mean, okay, or when did he do this, and that's an opportunity for you to teach past tense or teach whatever grammar points. That's where I said that maybe the grammar could be a mini lesson, yeah, mini lesson in a bigger lesson, integrated with other language skills. Okay, model sentences for oral practice plus picture. If you want this, some examples. If you have uh, model sentences, you can contrast sentence pairs like I walk to school, you write it on the board, as compared to I am walking to school. So it's a comparison, okay? Meaning to say you don't teach I walk to school, ed, all the time, and all of your examples I walk to school, etc., etc. They're trying to figure out one concept. But if you do two things and you contrast it, then they will understand two things, two different things. Yeah, and they will understand what the difference is. Okay, a lot of our students now, they always put had, yeah, when it could be simple past tense. Okay, they say I had, I had thought that this was a good idea. Why don't you just say I thought it was a good idea? Uh, it's okay, it's good enough. I thought it's a good idea. Okay, no need to say I had thought as if you want to put it further back in the past. Okay, but it's not necessary. Yeah, so you can compare. I had thought it was a good idea, and I thought it was a good idea. And you can talk about the difference between the two, and something like that. Okay, question and answer. Okay. Okay, here it got pattern practice of both the meaningless and meaningful variety. Okay, we haven't really talked about drills that much, right? Okay, the only thing I said is sometimes we shouldn't be just focusing on drills, and sometimes drills you can answer